This is the darkest King Kong iceberg on the internet, and if you're like me and you want to know everything about King Kong, the lore, hidden secrets, then this iceberg is for you. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the iceberg concept, you start at the tip, which is all common knowledge, and then you work your way downwards. And a disclaimer, the end tier of this video does get pretty dark, so you have been warned. We'll start at tier 1 and continue to work our way downwards, and as we work our way downwards, things only get more mysterious, lore heavy, and dark inducing, so prepare yourselves. So tier 1, the original Universal King Kong rides. Now, it's likely that everyone would have heard of Skull Island Reign of Kong, which is a trackless, dark ride located in the Island of Adventure in Universal Orlando, Florida. But this wasn't the original King Kong ride. Oh no, the original ride actually got closed down and caught fire. The original ride, called King Kong, or better known as King Kong Encounter, was an attraction formerly part of the studio tour at Universal Studios Hollywood in Los Angeles, but also was in Universal Studios Florida. It opened to guests in 1986, and the show began as a tour tram entered the soundstage into a world of New York City, where they basically watched Kong destroy the entire city. However, the ride itself was destroyed in the 2008 Universal Studios fire and was replaced by King Kong 360 3D, which opened in 2010. Godzilla Dorsal Fin Axe. Kong's battle axe is a Titan-sized weapon that appears in the 2021 legendary picture film Godzilla vs. Kong. Many people believe that Kong actually made this himself, but that's entirely wrong, as his ancestors actually made the axe during the war to effectively fight other Godzilla. So this means that at some point in time, a dorsal fin was taken off of a Godzilla, dead or alive, and is also wrapped in Godzilla's scales. It's highly likely to make a new appearance in Godzilla and Kong: The New Empire. Eat your vegetables. During the original 1962 Godzilla vs. King Kong, there's a scene where King Kong decides to pick up a tree and forcefully shove it into Godzilla's mouth, where people have used this to create a meme called Eat Your Vegetables. Additionally to this, in the 2021 Godzilla vs. Kong, Kong does exactly the same thing, except with the handle from his axe. Lost Spider Pit sequence. The Spider Pit scene is one of the names used to refer to a scene cut from the original King Kong at some point in its development. While many people believe it was present in the test print shown to the producers, there is no evidence to back this scene up at all, and its existence is hotly debated. This has earned it a legendary status, and decades of speculation, hearsay, and misinformation created many pop culture myths surrounding the sequence. Popular theories dating back to almost to the release of the original film say that it was cut for frightening test audiences, or at the behest of producers before it was sent to theaters. Despite all this, Kong and the cinema scholar Ray Mortson says it was never filmed at all and was cut alongside a scene of King Kong on New York rooftops. Peter Jackson's King Kong video game. Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official video game, was a 2005 action-adventure video game developed and published by Ubisoft. It was based on the 2005 film King Kong. The game was created in collaboration with the film director Peter Jackson, and the game follows the New York scriptwriter Jax, whatever his face is, through Skull Island, as he attempts to save his love interest, Ann Darrow, who's being sacrificed to the island's native giant gorilla, King Kong. The game was released in 2005 for multiple platforms, as well as Xbox 360 as a launch title. The console and PC versions received positive reviews, with critics praising the game's immersive environments and audio. Since its release, King Kong has gained a significant cult following and has been praised as a revolutionary title in the survival action first-person shooter genre. The Son of Kong film. Son of Kong is a very old 1933 American pre-code adventure monster film produced by RKO Pictures, and the film itself is a sequel to King Kong, being released just 9 months after, and it's a second entry in the King Kong franchise. The film itself is quite tragic. It features a group of people basically head into Skull Island, where they come across a giant albino gorilla, smaller than Kong but still over twice the height of a man. Little Kong is stuck in quicksand, so one of the guys decides to help him out and basically befriends him. Little Kong decides to help them on their adventure and journey in escaping Skull Island, fighting numerous dinosaurs and other fauna along the way. The protagonists quickly retrieve and board a lifeboat, but a violent earthquake and hurricane strikes the island and begins to sink it into the ocean. The water soon surrounds the cast and Little Kong atop a tall mound. With the ape's foot getting stuck in the cracking of the mound, he sacrifices himself to save Dunham by holding him above the water. King Kong 2005 Extended Cut. The original Peter Jackson's 2005 King Kong actually had an extended cut released in 2006. The release itself features 13 minutes of extra additional scenes edited back into the film. It features more monster fights and more extras basically being killed on Skull Island, although many people actually believe this to be the worst cut as opposed to the theatrical version. King Kong vs. Godzilla alternate ending. In the 1962 film King Kong vs. Godzilla, everyone has said there's been two alternate versions, one for the US and one for the Japanese. Japanese. The US version obviously showing Kong the victor, and the Japanese version obviously showing Godzilla the victor. Ironically enough, while the US version is very different from the Japanese original, the endings are essentially the same. Despite the popular but erroneous story that Godzilla winning the Japanese version, in both versions of the fight, Kong ends emerging from the ocean and swimming home. Yet somehow this urban legend that there were two endings preserved for decades, probably because there was no internet back then. Tier 2, heading just below the surface of the iceberg. This is where things start to turn a little strange and a little unheard of, while slowly descending into darker and darker territory. And one of my favourites in this tier definitely has to be the 1976 ripoffs. Kinhg Kong. Kinhg Kong, also known as Robot Kong, is a robot duplicate of King Kong that first appeared in the 1966 Rankin/Base animated series, The King Kong Show, and later appeared in the 1967 Toho film King Kong Escapes. Kinhg Kong is the creation of villainous Doctor Who, a mad scientist bent on world domination and the sworn enemy of King Kong. Toho planned to revive Kinhg Kong for several Godzilla film projects, but legal concerns regarding use of the character caused these films to be scrapped. Kong Skull Island director almost killed. In 2017, the director of Skull Island, Jordan Roberts, revealed that he was almost killed in a club attack by gangsters in Vietnam. Security footage shows Roberts being attacked repeatedly by two men and their friends in the middle of a nightclub. The director spent 10 days in the hospital, suffering a concussion, fractured skull, and hemorrhaging. The worst injury came when a bottle was broken over his head. King Kong vs. Prometheus. King Kong vs. Prometheus was a scrapped King Kong film proposed and conceived by Willis O'Brien. It eventually led to the production of Kong vs. Godzilla. The film would have featured the grandson of Dr. Frankenstein creating a giant grey-skinned, hairless, humanoid-shaped monster made of various African megafauna such as elephants and crocodiles. And at the same time, King Kong is revealed to have somehow survived his fall from the Empire State Building. The Doctor names him Prometheus and is docile thanks to a control device. However, Prometheus turns on his creator and kills him upon having the show being brought to San Francisco. With Prometheus now on a rampage, King Kong is turned loose to fend him off, and the two creatures do battle across the city. However, they both eventually perish after falling off the top of the Golden Gate Bridge and into the ocean. King Kong ripoff series.
Godzilla! It looks like Godzilla, but due to international copyright laws, it's not. Still, we should run like it is Godzilla! Though it isn't.
The King Kong ripoffs is a series of mockbuster films by the company Cash-In, and is one of King Kong's franchises. They're basically giant ripoffs of the original films, and some of the most notable are Ape, Queen of Kong, Goliathong, Yeti Giant of the 20th Century, King of the Lost World, and Rampage. Oh, and we have Ape vs. Monster. Operation Condor. Operation Condor, or as is also known as Operation Robinson Crusoe, is an unreleased King Kong film planned by Toho for release in 1966. Basically, the movie features King Kong fighting Ebirah, but the giant shrimp escapes. King Kong is then attacked by a giant condor and a squadron of red bamboo fighter jets, but destroys them. The natives of the island summon Mothra to save everyone. However, King Kong challenges Mothra when she gets to the island. Mothra manages to push King Kong away with one of her wings and carry the people off the island. King Kong also escapes from the island just before it explodes. King Kong 1996. King Kong 1996 is an unproduced attempt at a remake of the 1933 film of the same name, which was to be directed by Peter Jackson in the late 1990s. The project was cancelled by Universal Pictures in 1997, though Jackson was approached by the studio again years later and offered another chance to direct the remake. This resulted in the 2005 version of King Kong, directed by Peter Jackson. Godzilla vs. King Kong 1990. Godzilla vs. King Kong is an unmade Godzilla film, originally planned for release sometime around 1990 to 1991. Following the mediocre box office performance of Godzilla vs. Bellante in 1989, Toho planned to try and remake their next Godzilla film as profitable as possible. For this reason, they chose to remake their most successful film, King Kong vs. Godzilla, under the title Godzilla vs. King Kong. Details of the plot are mostly unknown. However, King Kong would have likely have fallen in love with a human scientist who would have later converted him into a cyborg, an idea loosely repackaged and used in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Ultimately, however, Toho found themselves unable to acquire the rights to use King Kong in the film, and instead decided to feature Kinhg Kong, or Robot Kong, as Godzilla's opponent instead. However, even doing that, they learned that even using the likeness of King Kong would be difficult, especially since Toho themselves did not create Kinhg Kong. So with this, they decided to scrap the film altogether. Tier 3. Heading to below the iceberg. We start to descend into more obscure facts now, such as the Cloverfield Easter egg and Lady Kong. Things only get worse after this tier, so you have been warned. Kong isn't the last of his kind. Kong species, also simply known as Kongs, are a race of gigantic apes which in various continuities encompass the King Kong franchise. They typically inhabit the remote Skull Island in the Pacific Ocean. King Kong himself is the most well-known member of the species and is often depicted as the last living survivor. However, other members of his kind are alluded to in some form of media and even appear via flashbacks or directly in other media sources. In Russell Blackford's 2005 novel Kong Reborn, a troop of gigantic apes dubbed gorilla gigans is found living on Skull Island, with their exact origins shrouded in mystery. For whatever reason, the original Kong lived separately from the self-sustaining troop of his species, though his clone is reintegrated into it. Kong in Batman. I know we're talking about King Kong, but hear me out. Batman Meets Godzilla is an unmade Godzilla film, and I kinda covered it in my Godzilla Iceberg. It was intended to be a collaboration between Toho and Greenway Productions, but it does feature King Kong versing Batman. Now, Godzilla and Batman, in preparation for their fight, Batman would have watched the end battle between Godzilla and King Kong from King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962, in preparation to fight Godzilla. Unfortunately, this scene never made. However, Batman did meet Godzilla and Kong in Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong, and it's a 7-issue comic book collaboration between DC Comics and Legendary Comics, and in association with Toho. Basically, they would cross over the Justice League with the monsterverse, and the barriers between worlds is breached during a confrontation between the League and the Legion of Doom. Godzilla and Kong then emerge on an Earth of the DC universe. Kong, King of the Apes. Kong, King of the Apes is an animated series that is produced by 41 Entertainment. It is the third animated series in the King Kong franchise, and the series was released on Netflix on April the 15th, 2016. The second season premiered on the 4th of April, 2018, and the final season of the show is yet to be produced. Basically, it was set in 2050, Kong becomes a wanted fugitive after wreaking havoc at Atlantis Island Natural History Museum and the Marine Preserve. As Kong is a wanted fugitive, most humans actually don't realise though that Kong is actually framed by an evil genius who plans to terrorize the world with an army of enormous robotic dinosaurs. As the only beast strong enough to save humanity from the mechanical dinos, Kong must rely on the help of 3 kids who really know the truth about him. Needless to say, this show sounds pretty wild. The Cloverfield Easter egg. Cloverfield is a 2008 American found footage monster film, and the plot follows 6 young New York City residents fleeing a massive monster and various other smaller creatures that attack the city during a farewell party. Whilst the city of New York is plagued with its own invasive beast, the filmmaker took the opportunity to give nods to some of the most influential creatures to ever grace the silver screen, and one of them being King Kong. At timestamp 1 hour, 6 minutes and 55 seconds, the group runs through the city. They see creatures stomping over tanks and helicopters flying overhead. A few moments later, the Cloverfield monster attacks a helicopter, just like King Kong attacked a plane. So he doesn't really physically appear in Cloverfield, this is just more Easter egg and pays homage to King Kong. Despite that, it is a very cool detail which you could easily miss if you're not a fan or didn't know about this. Kong can meld minds with humans. During the animated show Kong the Animated Series, it's shown that Kong can actually meld minds with humans. Basically, when Kong fell to his death from the Empire State Building upon being shot down by the biplanes in 1933, a scientist named Dr. Lorna Jenkins took DNA samples from him, which she used to create a clone counterpart of the original Kong, using the help of the DNA of her grandson, Jason. The doctor developed a technology called Cyberlink that can merge Jason with Kong, because Jason and his DNA are obviously part of Kong, thus enabling them to merge together during this cyberlink. Because of Jason's DNA inside of Kong, he has a younger brother relationship with Jason, and the two are basically like brothers throughout the entire show. I did say some of these were going to get pretty wild. Lady Kong. Lady Kong is a female giant ape and the mate of King Kong in the 1986 film King Kong Lives. Lady Kong closely resembles King Kong but features a few notable differences. In keeping with her gender, the fur around her head is a reddish colour, she also has a smaller sagittal crest on the top of her head, and she also has more pronounced breasts. She was discovered by an adventurer named Hank Mitchell and was brought back to the United States in order to provide a blood transfusion to the comatose King Kong. The blood transfusion was successful and Kong was revived with an artificial heart. Lady Kong and King Kong were kept in captivity together and eventually mated. And this is where Kong decides to do a jailbreak and breaks the two of them out of the institute they were being kept in and fled to the forest to live in peace. The US military was not happy about this and decided to go after them and captures Lady Kong while apparently killing Kong. After taking Lady Kong to the military base, it was learned that she's actually pregnant. As Lady Kong went into labor, King Kong, who was still alive but who they thought was dead because he had an artificial heart, arrived at the military base to rescue her. Kong battled the military forces and defeated them, but was fatally wounded wounded in the process. Kong managed to survive long enough to enter the base and reunite with Lady Kong and their newborn child, Baby Kong. Following Kong's death, Lady Kong and Baby Kong were taken back to Berino to live in peace. Nintendo vs. Universal. Nintendo vs. Universal was a 1983 legal case heard by the United States District Court. In their complaint, Universal Studios alleged that Nintendo's video game, Donkey Kong, was a trademark infringement of King Kong, the plot and the characters of which Universal claimed as their own.
Objection!
Nintendo argued that Universal had themselves proven that King Kong's plot and characters were in the public domain in Universal City Studios Incorporated. The judge ruled that Universal had acted in bad faith by threatening Nintendo's licenses and it had no right over the name King Kong or the characters and story. He further held that there was no possibility for consumers to confuse Nintendo's game and characters with King Kong films and their characters.
Objection!
Universal appealed the case, however, but the verdict was upheld. The case was a major victory for Nintendo, which was still a newcomer to the US market. This also established Nintendo as a major player in the industry and arguably gave the company the confidence that it could compete with the giants of America's media. The Mighty Kong. The Mighty Kong is a 1998 American animated monster musical film. It is an adaptation of the classic King Kong story produced by Lana Productions. It's basically a musical version of the original King Kong film, where you see Kong climb the tower, gets captured by a net, rips the net, reaches for Anne, and falls through the net plumb into the streets of New York. However, there is one main difference. Kong actually survives the fall. It was initially released in theaters from June the 16th, 1998, but was later released on DVD by Tri-Coast Entertainment in 2019. Tier 4, the bottom of the iceberg heading into the abyss. This tier is very interesting because it features a lot of information which even the hardened King Kong fan may have forgotten about or didn't know, such as the waving man, Queen Kong, and Kong being the heir to Atlantis. Now, you have been warned. After this, we move into tier 5, and that is some pretty heavy and dark stuff. Kong has never fought a T-Rex. In King Kong 1933 and King Kong 2005, you see King Kong fight what looks to be a T-Rex. King Kong kills both dinosaurs in the 33 and 2005 version by breaking their jaw. He also tries to do this again in Kong Skull Island 2017. But the fact of the matter is, Kong isn't actually fighting a T-Rex, but a V-Rex. And how do we know this? Well, a T-Rex has 2 claws on its tiny little arms, a V-Rex actually has 3. And in all iterations, even the 2005 film is actually called a V-Rex, not a T-Rex. Many fans initially thought that Kong was fighting an Allosaurus, but it was confirmed in the 2005 film that it was actually a V-Rex. Skull Island is always destined to be destroyed. Skull Island is a fictional island and the home of King Kong in the original 1933 film King Kong, in the 1976 film and the 2005 remix, and in the monsterverse film Kong, Skull Island and Godzilla vs. Kong. The island itself is home to some pretty nasty creatures, fauna and flora. And in most iterations, the island's most distinct feature is a huge mountain shaped like a skull located in the island's center, hence the name Skull Island. What is extremely interesting about Skull Island, however, is that in every continuity, and I mean there's a lot of continuities featuring Skull Island, it basically gets destroyed in some way, and that usually happens by it sinking into the ocean. The Waving Man. Now this one is quite funny. In the 1976 film King Kong, they needed a load of extras for the end scene. You know, that infamous scene where Kong jumps off the building and is then found on the floor while there's numerous people around him. What is really funny is that there's some random guy in the background just waving at the camera casually. The directors left this in because they couldn't be bothered to do the retake with all them people. And if I was that guy, I probably would have done the same thing. Bride of Godzilla did Hollow Earth first. Hollow Earth is a reoccurring location in the monsterverse and was first theorized to exist in Kong Skull Island in 2017. It subsequently appeared in both Godzilla, King of the Monsters in 2019 and Godzilla vs. Kong 2021. But the fact of the matter is, the idea of Hollow Earth actually came from a Godzilla film, and it's a really old one. It would have appeared in the cancelled Godzilla film Bride of Godzilla, where they would have portrayed an inhabitable ceiling and floor, and this idea was actually thought up in 1956, believe it or not, way predated in the 2017 film. But because this was a cancelled film, we can't really count it, although there is another iteration somewhere called KOTA, which mentions Hollow Earth, but I can't find any information on that. The April 1st, 2005 announcement. On April 1st, 2005, director Peter Jackson announced about making 2 back-to-back sequels to his original 2005 King Kong film. Jackson announced that the 2 movies were to be called Son of Kong and King Kong Into the Wolf's Lair, and would star Naomi Watts, Adrian Brode, and Jack Black. He also revealed shots of the King Kong script, early footage, and designs for monsters to appear in the movie. However, it was later revealed that the story was part of an elaborate April Fool's joke involving the cast members and crew of the King Kong movie, Queen Kong. Yes, this is entirely real. Queen Kong is a 1976 British-German adventure comedy film parodying King Kong. The film was never released in the United Kingdom due to legal action being taken by Diamond De Laurentiis, who was the producer of the 1976 King Kong movie and actually the copyright holder of King Kong at that time. However, it did get a release in Italy and Germany, and the film has since resurfaced on DVD. The film itself has a cult following in Japan, and in 1988, a troupe of Japanese comedians produced their own Japanese dialogue for the film. The plot itself is quite simple. This film switches the traditional roles of the females and males and reverses the sexes of the original cast of King Kong. So basically, a man finds himself the attraction of an enormous giant female gorilla that pursues him across London. Kong is heir to Atlantis. Kong King of Atlantis is a 2005 animated giant monster film produced by BKN International and is a tie-in to the Kong the Animated Series. It was released by Warner Brothers for DVD in November 2005. Basically, Kong is shown climbing up the Empire State Building as an underwater city is rising above the ground, engulfing New York City in an ocean by an eclipse when it is revealed to be a nightmarish vision by the shaman Luau, who awakens to find King Kong safe and still on Kong Island. Basically, this shaman now believes that the prophecy of doom has begun. It's revealed that a giant queen reptile who rules over the lost city of Atlantis believes Kong will finally bring them back to power. She sends her servant Lord to go and collect Kong and tells him that he is the lost king of Atlantis and should return to claim his throne, promising him more power and land than on Kong Island. King Kong gladly accepts. With this, it's also revealed that Kong was the original ruler of Atlantis before his demise and who also sank Atlantis to save the rest of the world from the Queen Reptilia.
This cannot be happening!
Not too sure about this one, but when Kong and Jason go ballistic, you get Mega Kong.
Basically, this evil queen reptile wants to use Kong to take over the world. They foil her plans basically and leave Atlantis to the bottom of the ocean, and hence, King Kong is the heir to Atlantis. 1993 exists in the 2005 film. Peter Jackson's 2005 King Kong film actually takes place in 1933, the same year that the original film was made. Early in the film, when Carl Dunham is looking for a new lead actress for his movie, the dialogue suggests that the original King Kong, 1933, exists and was being made at the same time he was making his movie. The Legend of King Kong. The Legend of King Kong is an unmade 1976 remake of King Kong and was to be produced by Universal Pictures. Universal approached RKO Pictures, offering them $200,000 plus 5% of the film's net profits, although there was no written contract. Universal was confident that they received verbal approval from RKO. However, they would soon learn that RKO also signed a deal with Dino De Laurentiis and Paramount Pictures to produce a remake of the film with a tentative release of 1976. Universal proceeds to sue both Paramount and RKO for the rights to King Kong, claiming that they had previously agreed a verbal agreement with RKO to produce their own remake.
Objection!
In 1976, a federal judge ruled in Universal's favour and basically said that they could make the movie because King Kong had fell into the public domain. It's a tricky one though, because the film itself was still under RKO copyright, but the plot as depicted in the novel was now part of the public domain. So even though they had the plot of the novel, the license still fell under RKO, so if they produced their film, they would have to give them a share of the profits. Universal decided to scrap the movie entirely. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to Tier 5. Now, you have been warned, this can get pretty dark and features some pretty heavy stuff, so prepare yourselves. Heart attack incident for the Skull Island Reign of Kong. The wife of a Guatemala man who died after riding a Universal ride in Orlando filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the theme park. Jose Arania, who was 38, had decided to rest on a bench after riding the Skull Island Reign of Kong ride at Universal Islands of Adventure on December the 10th, 2016. By the time his wife and their 8-year-old son returned to check on him, they found him on the ground surrounded by park staff. He was taken to Dr. Phillips Hospital but was pronounced dead after suffering a massive heart attack. After this, the family's attorney filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the theme park. They claimed that they should have been warning signs in Spanish as the man himself spoke hardly any English and wasn't aware of the dangers. Kong's blood on Empire State Building. In a recent King Kong TV series, Kong was actually brought back and cloned using the blood from the Empire State Building over 80 years ago. As you can see in the 1933 film, Kong is obviously shot at by helicopters, planes, etc. on top of the Empire State. It was theorized that his blood remained on that Empire State Building for over 80 years for this new program for Kong to be able to be cloned. Kong knew he would die. In the 1976 film and 2005 remake, we see Kong getting shot by helicopters and planes before he actually falls down and dies. But it's theorized that Kong actually knew he was going to die from his injuries by the look he actually gives Anne before his final moments. Personally, Kong wasn't a stupid animal and he knew something was coming, and makes his death even more emotional in my eyes. King Kong's unalive moment. In the novelization King Kong 1932, which actually came out before the 1933 movie, we see a different ending to King Kong. The ending sequence in the novel, however, is slightly different to the film, where you see Kong being attacked by the plane and he's fatally wounded in his heart and lungs. Kong begins to cough uncontrollably before looking down at Anne and jumping off the building in an attempt to grab another plane. However, he misses and plummets to the streets below, essentially unaliving himself off that building. Willis O'Brien's King Kong heart attack. Willis O'Brien was a massive King Kong producer and produced several massive King Kong hits. He also came up with the idea for King Kong vs. Prometheus, which eventually led into the production of King Kong vs. Godzilla, though O'Brien was never consulted at all about the finished product, nor given any credit for his ideas. Now, the rest of this story is pretty tragic. O'Brien came up with the idea of King Kong vs. Frankenstein, which evolved into King Kong vs. Prometheus. He showed all the self-drawn art and script for the proposed film to Daniel Shin of RKO Productions, who in turn introduced O'Brien to producer John Beck. After a handshake deal with O'Brien, Beck commissioned screenwriter George Worthing Yates to flesh out the screenplay treatment in a full script that could be shown to investors. Yates changed the title to King Kong vs. Prometheus, and Beck went to Toho with the script. Toho purchased the rights to use the King Kong character from RKO and produced King Kong vs. Godzilla with our script instead, which Beck retained and distributed the rights for in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. These deals were all done without O'Brien's knowledge, and he was never given any credit for his ideas by Toho. In fact, O'Brien was not even aware of the Toho film's existence until after it had been released in Japan theatres. He contemplated suing Beck for intent to defraud, but unfortunately did not have enough money for a practical legal battle. On November the 10th, 1962, O'Brien died of a heart attack in his home in Darlin. His widow would later cite the frustrations of the Kong vs. Godzilla Frankenstein deal contributed to his death. Additionally, while Toho replaced the giant Frankenstein monster with Godzilla as his opponent, it revisited the concept for a proposal but unmade follow-up title, Frankenstein vs. Godzilla, which in itself was O'Brien's idea. Once again, O'Brien was never given any credit for his ideas by Toho. The tragedy of Willis O'Brien's family. O'Brien, who was one of the animators and creators that we just discussed earlier, had two sons, William and Willis Jr. These two sons were with his ex-wife Hazel. William, however, was slowly going blind due to a disease. While making one of his daily visits to the set, O'Brien, who had remained close to his two sons after the separation from his estranged wife, invited Willis Jr. and now the completely blind William with him to handle the Kong and dinosaur models. A few weeks after the visit, O'Brien's ex-wife Hazel shot and killed William and Willis Jr. before turning the gun on herself. Allegedly, the reason for this was the success of King Kong and the jealousy of her sons going to spend time with their father on this now magnificent set. 2005 thought of unaliving themselves. The original 2005 Peter Jackson film of King Kong, in the original script, Anne Derraway thought of actually falling off the building in an attempt to unalive herself. She has these thoughts of actually jumping after Kong after he fell. The 1976 and 1986 wardrobe malfunctions. Now I know what you're thinking immediately as something happened, something grim with these King Kong suits. I mean, they could malfunction, people are inside of them. Well, you'll be completely wrong, although it's kind of on track. The wardrobe malfunctions themselves actually referred to the claws rather than the big heavy costumes. And they referred to Jessica Lange and Linda Hamilton briefly having their breasts exposed for half a second in 76 when Kong is messing with Dawn's outfit, and in 86 when they find out Kong isn't a lady. Now, this isn't my usual type of content. I usually cover Jurassic World, Jurassic Park inspired stuff and monsterverse stuff I'm moving into now. So if you did enjoy this, hit subscribe because there'll be plenty more coming up, and hit like because this video has taken me absolutely ages to research, film, edit, everything, you name it. So I would really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this one, go check out my Godzilla one. I've also got a Jurassic World inspired one. Go and check them out. They're very much like this. Hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Shadows, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.